we're going to, first of all, love everyone to remain muted if possible. And at the end, hopefully we're going to have some time for more open Q&A, at which time you can certainly unmute yourself. Post your questions in the chat room. Mike and KiKi and Corliss, if she's available, will be monitoring chat as I'm chatting. But then again, those three will also be helping me with the dialogue too. You're certainly welcome to use the hand raise feature. The advanced questions that some of you wrote will be addressed first, followed by any live questions. And I will put the link again at the end for those of you who, for next week, if you'd like to put in advanced questions. And the recording, this meeting is being recorded, will be posted on my website at this link. So let's jump in with the advanced questions. I put them into categories as I thought was appropriate. And you know, I just want to mention this in advance that because this is such a short period of time, I'm going to try, and Mike and KiKi and Corliss will try to answer questions pretty quickly. Any one of the topics that most people brought up certainly could have hours of dialogue on there, certainly in a personalized way too, but we're going to really try to move through things fairly quickly in this high-level meeting. Okay, so let's talk about resumes first of all. So here's the first question that I received. In the current job market, this person asked, what do you consider to be the top qualities hiring managers seek, and how does a job seeker present these qualities through a resume? So let me just open up by saying, look, the concept of qualities is a very amorphous kind of a thing. When we talk about qualities, some people think of it as the soft skills, in other words, how you do your work. But what I would like to suggest to you is that the kinds of qualities that an employer is looking for are really the hard skills that on a resume, employers want to know what you can do for them. Now, the how you do it will show up in an interview, okay? The how you do it will show up in terms of the culture fit when you're interviewing. But in terms of your actual resume, they want to know, can you do this job? And one of the biggest tips I would ever give a job seeker is to make sure that you customize your resume for every single job posting. In that job posting, even if it looks generic, which I know a lot of them do, because if you're looking for one kind of job, you probably see job posting after job posting. It's sort of like there's a big blur, like they all look the same. Well, there actually are subtleties. There are subtleties in the kinds of skills that an employer is looking for. What I would recommend is that you try to pull out those key words, those key phrases, and have them embedded within your resume. One of the ways you can do that is by labeling your accomplishments. And I'm going to share with you an example. As I mentioned earlier, I am a resume writer, and I'm just going to share with you a very quick example of one of my resume templates. This is redacted, so it's a real person, but a fake information. And just to show you what I'm talking about here, if you see, there's a text box, and you don't have to use a text box, but I would recommend some kind of highlighted section at the top where you put in keywords, key concepts. But then down here, next to every single accomplishment story, this is where you would put the keywords to label those accomplishments. The reason why that's important is because recruiters take, on average, and I'm not making this up, I'm not exaggerating, they take on average 6 seconds to review a resume. I like to say 2.5, but actually the surveys, the statistics say 6 seconds. And the reason that this is so helpful is that when an employer is looking down this resume, they want to see the key words fast, because their job, ladies and gentlemen, is to screen you out. What? Yes, their job is to screen you out, not screen you in, because they have hundreds of resumes to go through, and they need to narrow and narrow and narrow. And I actually would like, Mike, if you want to chime in here at all, because you've been a corporate recruiter for many years, if you want to comment on this whole concept of keywords and resume screening, would love to get your input.
Sure. So right away, I would say that as a former recruiter, I'm looking to see, is this person even in the ballpark? Do they have those keywords at the very top of their resume? For one thing, if they should take the time to put those keywords and weave them in at the top, just to show that they tailor the resume and they are a really good fit for this particular role. And then of course, I'm trying to get a feel for, is this really who they are? Is this, what their expertise is in? And so all those things, I'm going to look at the top of the resume, because that's where they really say, this is who I am, this is my main area of expertise. And so, I look at the summary of qualifications and skills, I look at whatever that highlight is at the top to get a sense for, are they a good fit for this job? Have they read the job description, and did they take the time to tailor their resume?
Thank you, Mike. And I think the overall concept there is that while you certainly have your career goals and your career aspirations, your job is to solve the employer's business problems. I'd like you to write that down. Your job is to solve their problems. Yes, you have needs, and yes, hopefully they are asking you about your needs and what your career aspirations are, but that's them asking you. But what you provide to them needs to be a very specific solutions-oriented resume, again, customized to every single position. And I know that takes time, but it's absolutely worth it. Okay, so going back here to our questions. So how do you modify your resume for any job search? Well, this is actually goes right along with what we were just saying, because again, it's the customization, right? Have a master resume. Have what I call, it's the kitchen sink. It's got every spice in the cabinet in that resume. It could be super, super long, but for every new job search, go ahead and cut and paste and just customize and pull out only that which is needed and leave that which is not. And by the way, we could talk at other times about branding overarchingly, but what I would suggest to you is that your resume it should be what I'll call a go forward resume. In other words, it should showcase where you're going, not just where you've been. What do I mean by that? Of course, my resume is where I've been. Well, not exactly, because if you have if your aspiration is to career change, or even focus more deeply on a specific area from what you've done in the past, if you are able to take that resume and at the top, if you remember, I put a headline there, that heading, that, if you will, career title should reflect the job that you're looking for. So for example, that person, it's a digital marketing leader, that could have just said marketing and communications, it could have said public relations, it could have said a lot of things, but it said digital marketing because that person wants the employer to know that they're a digital marketing expert. And so all of the accomplishment stories were related to digital marketing, not public relations, not specifically digital marketing. And I say that because so often when people write their resumes, they are only focused on what they've done. This laundry list, if I've accomplished it, I put it on my resume. That's not a strategic way to do your resume. It should be targeted and it should be focused and it should reflect where you're going, not just where you've been. And I'll give one quick example of that. Years ago, I had a client, her name was Barbara, and she was in the nonprofit realm, and her expertise and the thing that she loved to do the most was coalition building. She is a lobbyist type, public affairs, we're kind of in that advocacy space, which a lot of people are in DC. And she came to me, and one of her greatest accomplishments was working for a nonprofit, and she put together their 50th anniversary gala. And I said, Barbara, that's a great accomplishment, but it has nothing to do with the advocacy brand that you're trying to put out there. I'm so sorry, we really shouldn't put that on there. Why? Because it would be brand confusion. Had we listed this accomplishment, it would have showcased her to be a meeting planner. She was not a meeting planner, she's a public affairs professional. So I hope that makes sense. Make sure to curate your examples according to what you're looking for. Thirdly, the question is, what numbers could be put in the achievement section of a resume if your desired position is routine-like, for example, bookkeeper, researcher, that kind of thing? I'm gonna answer this, and then Mike, I'd love to get your opinion as well. So look, most people when they advise about resumes always talk about metrics, numbers, right? What's your results? And yes, that's extremely important when you have numbers to share. Not every job is quantifiable, right? Not every job is a sales job, for example. That said, where possible, there might be some numbers that you could put in. For example, if you managed a budget, put that number in. It's not a metric in the sense of savings and increases and decreases and so forth, but it is a number. It's a quantifiable thing. If there's any numbers you can put in, do put in. But then again, I as a recruiter, and again, Mike, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. If I'm screening someone who is not in a role that really is quantifiable, I'm okay with that, as long as the person is giving me accomplishment stories, not just job duties. There is a big difference. The job duty is what you were responsible for. Your accomplishment are your results, are your outcomes. So you want to phrase those stories in a story form, like 1 or 2 lines. A really good format is SAR, situation, action, result. Sometimes in the resume, you could start with the R first, the results, and then the action that you took. But making sure that it's very pinpointed and it shows that there was an outcome here. You weren't just hired to do something. You actually have a result and an accomplishment of what you were hired to do. So again, I don't believe that metrics and numbers and percentages are always important, as long as you have an accomplishment. Mike, I'd love to hear from you too.
Yeah, so I agree. Numbers, any way you can weave in numbers, the better. So they don't have to be super powerful numbers about how you saved $1 million or anything like that. Literally just putting, you coordinated a 3-day conference with 10 attendees, or you presented to 15 people, or you do executive support for executives. Anything you can do. It doesn't need to be a big number, but just to show, it actually shows detail orientation. It shows that you were really invested and really involved with that project. You know the details of how many people you were supporting. It's a good, strong indicator that you were deeply invested in what you were doing and you're results oriented, because you know you can quantifiably talk about what you did and what the accomplishment was. So.
Right. And it also adds credibility to your example, because just because you put a job duty down doesn't mean that there was an accomplishment with it. By telling the story and by saying this many people or this budget or what have you, it adds overall credibility. Yeah, the person actually did that. Right. Okay. So moving on, interviewing. And you see we're going through this pretty fast. What's the best way to ensure getting a response after having an interview, a response in terms of whether the employer wants to hire me? Okay, so first of all, just to kind of give you an overall concept here, when you are in your job search, when you are in the interviewing process, 3 words, write them down, put them on top of your computer. Pack your patience, okay? Employers are busy, busy, busy. And your job search and the interview you've just been on is maybe the most important thing to you. It is unfortunately not the most important thing on their plate. They are super busy. If it's a corporate recruiter, they've got 30 open jobs on their desk. If it's if you're dealing with an HR person, they've got every part of HR on their desk. If you're dealing directly with the hiring manager, they have things to do that have nothing to do with your job search. And so even though they might say to you, hey, we'll get back with you in a week, we'll get back with you in 2 weeks, double that, triple that. Pack your patience. It is very, very likely that they're not going to get back to you in the time frame that they said, number one. Number two, unfortunately, not every employer is that organized, frankly, about their recruiting process, and just may not have a process in place to respond to you about anything at any time. Is that good? No, unfortunately. I'm not judging it. I'm just saying that that's just sort of the reality, because a lot of people are not professional recruiters, don't have a process or a mechanism for getting back to candidates. That said, to answer this question, I would recommend that you send a gentle follow-up. So for example, at the end of your interview, first level, second level, ask the employer, so when could I expect to hear back from you about next steps? So at least that gives them an opportunity to manage your expectations, and they'll say, well, you should hear from me in about 2 weeks. Okay, 2 weeks comes, 2 weeks goes. You don't want to follow up on 2 weeks in 1 day. Now there's several days. I'd even give them a week. And then you can do a very gentle follow-up. First of all, remember to send a thank you note. Okay, send a thank you note after your interview. A lot of people miss that step. Remember, a typo-free, well-crafted thank you note. But after you've done that and the time has gone by, you can go ahead and send a gentle follow-up. Dear Ms. Recruiter, it was wonderful meeting with you, a few weeks back. I'd love to re-express my interest, and if you are able to provide an update on the timing of next steps, that would be great. And that's it. That would be my recommendation, and I would leave it alone. That said, if you can provide any value to the employer, for example, you found an article somewhere that has to do with their industry. or it could be about the industry itself. It could be about the department that you'd be working in. You're in the marketing department, and I don't know, there's something interesting, and you want to offer something of value. Very appreciated. Don't bombard them, but if there's like a little touch base that you can do, that's great. It endears you to them. It shows that you're interested in following up. Also, of course, keeps you top of mind. But as I mentioned, I would do that one gentle follow-up and then leave it alone. The last thing you want to be seen as nudgy, okay, is pushy, because again, they're very, very busy. So Mike, any thoughts you have on that?
Yeah, there's not much you can do besides, towards the end of the interview, ask about next steps. And yeah, it takes time. It takes time for a lot of reasons. One of the reasons is, even for the runner-up candidate, they may get an offer, but the top candidate may need a week and may end up declining. And then finally the runner-up candidate gets an offer, and things do take time.
Things takes time. And by the way, if you have not heard in a long, whatever you consider to be a long time after they said that they would follow up, that doesn't mean it's over. That doesn't mean it's over. You could get a call back a month later, and all of a sudden they're like, hey, we want to bring you in for a final interview. Like, wait, what? I thought you were off my radar. No, you weren't off their radar. And the reason is that from the employer's point of view, for better or for worse, they always think that they have you in the palm of their hand. They always think that they can always go back to you and you'll always be available. That's not the case, right? You're doing your job search and you may very well get a job, but that's not the employer's mindset. The employer's mindset is, the candidate is there, they interviewed, likely they want this job. When we're ready, we will come back and touch base. And so therefore, if you don't hear from a long time, it's likely because all these other things are going on. And then suddenly they're like, hey, now we're ready to talk to you. Well, you may or may not be available, but if you are, just remember that it's not over until it's over, okay? So this individual has had a long career, is a nuclear engineer, has not interviewed for their last 2 jobs. In fact, I hear that all the time. Oh my goodness, I hear so many of my coaching clients say, I've never had to interview. I was always recruited. Somebody referred me into the job. What do I do? So as I mentioned earlier, any one of these topics we could talk about forever, and this is one, right? How do you prepare for interviewing? I'm just going to give one quick tip. Again, we can go into it. In fact, actually, KiKi, this would be a great time when I'm done with my intro. It's for you to share something about video interviewing, because that's the way we do interviews these days. So here's my one major tip for interviewing, and I've got lots. The one thing goes back to this idea of you trying to be a solution to the employer's problem, okay? So if you keep that in mind, what you're gonna wanna do is prepare for this interview. Do your homework. And I don't just mean read the website. I mean research. I mean research this industry, research this organization. Go on LinkedIn and type in the name of the organization into the search bar. See who comes up, see who works there. What do they do? Google people. I mean, www is your best friend when it comes to research. There is so much that you can do to set yourself apart, to come in and say, hey, I've done some research on you and I've been starting to connect some of the dots, and then ask some really thoughtful questions of the employer about the business challenges that they have, about the role that you're going to be providing, about the problems that you can solve. If you come in with some really fantastic questions, I'm telling you, you're going to be setting yourself apart. Not to mention for the second level interview, maybe even the third, you might even want to put together a little presentation, a little PowerPoint deck, just to do maybe even a SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. In other words, some sort of analysis of where the organization is at, maybe where the department is at, helping them to see that you're a dot connector, that you're a strategic thinker. And you, by the way, you can do this at any level job, even if you are an administrative professional. It may not be super strategic, but if there's anything you can do that says to the employer, look, you're hiring me because you have business problems. I've done some research, I've done some homework. Here are some ideas that I have. Here are some ways that I can contribute. And here are some questions that I have related to that. So actually, Mike, if you could maybe chime in here, and then KiKi, if you kind of give a little tip on video interviewing, that would be great.
Yep. So as far as your research, I would try to get a sense for what does the company value, what are the competencies they're most likely going to try to evaluate. So they may be all about your analytical skills, your data orientation, problem solving, critical thinking. They may be all about teamwork skills. So if you can prepare, I would even do a spreadsheet. You know, the first column is the competency that you think that they are most interested in. And then the next 3 columns are the situation, action, result of experiences that you have that you think are very applicable and address that competency. And really just get those down pat so you're ready to share those. And just know that even if they don't ask about that exact competency, you could probably use that experience or story and apply it to the question they're asking. So I think putting together a spreadsheet is a efficient way to prepare yourself for the interview.
Absolutely, Mike. Thanks so much for that. Yeah, every time you're thinking about an accomplishment story, I would almost unpack it like an accordion. Take that story, stretch it apart. What skills did I use? What hard skills, meaning the functional skills, the things you did? What soft skills was I using? Because in the interview, remember I mentioned earlier, the interview is different than the resume. The resume, they're looking for what you did. The interview, they're looking for how you did it. What you did, how you did it. So the what you did are your keywords, functional skills. The interview, how you did it, are your soft skills. So to what extent were you using critical thinking skills in that accomplishment, or resiliency, or teamwork, or any of those kinds of things? Because in the interview, the employer is saying, are you going to be a good cultural fit? Yes, can you do the job? They'll certainly ask you about that. But they want to know, do you play well in the sandbox, right? Are we going to like working with you? Is our team going to be appropriate for you? Is the boss going to be appropriate for you? So they're listening for the how, not just the what. And then,
yeah. Sorry.
I'm sorry, KiKi. I asked you to talk and then I didn't. Go
I thought that was my moment. I'm jumping
It was your
in.
moment. It's your moment.
So another thing to remember is that, you know, whenever we go into these interview situations, emotions run high, nerves run high, and especially right now when so many of us are also dealing with that technical side where we're having to log in and try to communicate and show that we're worthy and we're the perfect person for the job. By connecting through a webcam, one of the things that we need to be thinking about is how can we help instill a sense of trust or trustworthiness with the person that we're talking to, because it is in sort of, are you the cultural fit? Are you someone that makes them feel safe? Are you someone who's likable? Are you someone that they feel like they have a connection with? And if you can do that, if you can figure out a way to better connect, even though you're not sitting across the table from them physically all the time, if you can figure out and think about ways that you can better connect ahead of time and show up prepared, then you're going to be in a better position to sway someone to your side and to say, yeah, you know, they need to make it to that next step because I really like them. They seem like they have everything pulled together. And just really quickly, you know, one way that you can do that is to really take into account, if you stop right now and look at your surroundings in the frame and look at where you are in the frame in Zoom right now, and you think, what is this saying about me? You know, and I see some of us are maybe standing up a little straighter. We're like, okay, what is this saying about me? But it's this kind of thing where we have to think about the perception on their side in a different way than maybe we have before. So that's what I thought that I'd add. You know, Shira, I have a million other things to say.
I know you do. Thank you, KiKi. I know you could go on and on. Thank you for that. All right, so let's keep going here. So when and how should an applicant discuss an extended years of medical leave absence? Now, I appreciate the question very much. Again, you're not the only person to ask that. So certainly, let's just to start with, look, and it is because of the Americans with Disabilities Act, it is discriminatory for an employer to ask you about anything related to your medical history. And certainly if you were to share your medical history, right, that opens you up for potential discrimination. So I do understand why that is the question. One of the things, the ways that I've gotten around that with my clients, and Mike, I would be really interested in your side. Even Corliss, I haven't chimed in with Corliss yet because we have some questions about federal government, and she's has a lot to say. But Corliss, maybe you have a thought too with the government side of things. But what I would recommend, and I'm going to show a quick example of that, is to have a section, right, where you to account for that time. So 2010 to 2015, right? Maybe that was your time frame. To actually have the heading say something like personal leave of absence or personal sabbatical, something like that. And then underneath it, the short description says, cared for a family member, or because remember, you are your own family. So this is not personal. You are your own family. Had a family medical situation or something to that effect, where you're saying there was a legitimate reason why you were stepping away from the job market, and now ready to step back in. So you have like maybe 2 sentences, cared for a personal family member for this period of time, and as of X date, ready to re-enter the full-time job market. So that's my kind of way around it. Mike, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, for these kind of situations, I would say it's best to just, first of all, I wouldn't bring it up unless you need to, in an interview especially. And then I would also say, just be real, just be genuine, be candid. Life happens, everyone understands that, and try to put a positive spin on it. Try to say something to the effect of how you made the most of it, or what you learned, or how you grew and progressed during this time, and things like that.
Yeah. And also, so that will be on so you mentioned this on the interview. On the resume itself, Mike, I'm sorry, I should have probably put this in the resume category. Do you have any other comments around the languaging of it?
Let's see, on the resume itself, it's more and more acceptable to have gaps on the resume. And it was, to some extent before COVID, and especially now. How to put that on the resume? Yeah, not a lot of details, but just brief. I had a medical leave of absence, very brief.
Yeah. So Mike, so my thinking is not actually to personalize it, to say I had a medical leave of absence, just because we don't want the employer to possibly discriminate. Would you also agree with that, to say maybe a family member, or how, I know this is tricky. That's just my own way of handling it.
Yeah, that's probably best. I wouldn't bring it up unless you feel like you need to.
Yeah. Okay, good. All right. So moving on, salary. I only have one question here, although I know people have lots of questions about salary. I'm going to address this particular one. I want to make a career change, but should I be willing to take a pay decrease? Again, I'll respond. Mike, would love to hear from you as well. So yeah, this again is very tricky, because I'm of 2 minds with it. On the one hand, you're worth your wages, right? You're a competent individual, and you're worth a decent salary. That said, if you're making a career shift, look, an employer is taking a risk in hiring you, okay? And they may not consider you as qualified as somebody else at your level. So for example, you were director level in one career field, and then you're trying to make a shift, and really you'd only be qualified really for that manager level. Yeah, there would necessarily be probably some sort of decrease, but I have to address it from the employer side of things. And this is a whole conversation we could have about career changing. We don't have time for all of this right now, but understand it is a risk for that employer to hire you if you've never done that job before. There are ways around it, and we could talk maybe at another time about how to recraft your resume and your LinkedIn profile to showcase your competencies, to kind of repurpose them. But if you are trying to make the case to an employer, look, I am interested in this kind of work. I've done similar kinds of work. I've maybe worked in a similar industry. I really feel like I'm ready to make this move. You have to remember that they are looking at you in comparison to every other candidate who likely has done the work. And then you're coming in and saying, well, actually I haven't, but I've got transferable skills. They have to be convinced of that, right? That you're actually worth that you are the person compared to all the other people who are qualified that they should be hiring. And by the way, a quick tip there is to even get yourself noticed is to do it through a referral, right? To do it through an employer referral. So somebody who knows you, likes you, and trusts you says to their employer, hey, you really need to consider KiKi, you really need to consider Corliss. but that's just to get you in. But once you're in the door, yeah, they're going to say, look, you know, you haven't done, if they do get to the point of wanting to offer you the job, which is some hurdles, look, you haven't done this kind of work before. We don't feel like, you know, you meet that salary band. I do recommend that you be open at least to taking that decrease. That said, you could negotiate and say, look, in my last position, I was at X. I realized that I'm not, you know, at the same level. What can we do anything to push that salary base closer in the direction of where I was? So if you say that word closer, if you ask them to sort of move it north, they might start here, but maybe you can get them up a little bit, because most employers understand that there is some negotiation that is required. Mike, any thoughts?
Yeah, so the prevailing thought among recruiters and hiring managers is that a candidate's not going to accept the job if it doesn't at least meet their current salary. So that's the way recruiters and hiring managers, I think, operate, is, you know, we have to at least offer them what they currently make. You know, that's sort of how things have worked. Between you and me, between job seekers and me, yes, I think you should be willing to accept a pay decrease, but no one has to know that until until the very end when you might accept that. So you would definitely just be objective about it. You know, show that you've done your research. You know what people make. You've gone to Glassdoor. You've seen what the average person makes in this industry and for this particular job, and this is what you've made before, and you know, just operate as if, you know, why would I take a pay decrease? But yeah, between you and me, you know, I would be willing to accept that in the current environment if you're making a career change.
Okay. And at another time, we'll make sure to go over salary negotiation techniques overall. I just want to make sure we're covering the questions for today, and then we can address that another time. All right, so Corliss, you have been wonderful to be patient here, but we do have some questions for you, and I just put them kind of all here. The first two questions are specifically about getting hired by the federal government. The third question, actually, Corliss and Mike, maybe even more Mike than Corliss could answer, that has to do with security clearance. But Corliss, I know you have taught many classes at the Career Network Ministry for many years on this topic. Corliss is actually a former employee of OPM, the Office of Personnel Management. She's been a federal resume writer in her team for also many years, and could talk about it for hours and hours. So Corliss, if you'd like to address maybe question number one, how to get hired by the federal government, maybe just a few tips, and then maybe you can answer the second question around, you know, should you answer yes if you were a former federal government employee, but that job was 30 years ago, and then how do you avoid age discrimination? So I'm just gonna let you take it from here. You might be on mute, Corliss. Did she drop off? Corliss, are you still with us? Oh my goodness, I know she was here. Oh, she just came back. I think she just dropped off. Corliss, are you back with us?
Shira?
Yes. Oh, okay. I had just actually tossed the ball to you, and I guess you had dropped off. So what we're looking for here, we're on your slide
Yeah.
to see if you could provide us a few tips about getting hired by the federal government, and also we have the second question here where the person asked if they should answer yes, that they were a former federal government employee, even though that job was 30 years ago, and then if so, how do you avoid age discrimination? So feel free to take it from here.
All right, so a couple big questions. Can you hear me okay?
We can.
Okay, beautiful. So a couple tips on getting hired by the federal government. Lots and lots of nuances and differences from the corporate sector, too numerous to mention here, but I'll tell you the top probably 2 or 3 things that hinder folks. Number one is the resume. So a typical federal resume is not at all like the corporate that you described. It's usually about 5 pages long. It could be a little bit longer. And it's not just the content. It's not just the corporate resume times 4, if you will. It's actually a very different type of content. We focus on the skills, the processes, as you talked about, that are in the corporate sector more described in the interview, we actually fold those into the federal resume. So it's a skill-based resume. Accomplishments are great and they need to be incorporated and baked in there. But the main focus is the skills. Most people don't understand this. And so they submit a corporate resume, 2 pages, 1 page, and the HR recruiters in the federal government are looking for a match between the criteria that they're looking for and your resume. And when you don't have a lengthy resume that includes the skills that you utilized over your career, they can't make the match. So it's like a checklist. And a lot of folks miss the mark just by not submitting a resume that shows what it needs to show. Second real challenge is that many people apply to jobs for which they are not qualified. So if you have a great package and then you submit it for a job that is not a good fit for you, you're going to miss the mark again. So there's lots of nuances, Shira. There's information out there that is also false because a lot of people don't know the federal process. So you got to be really careful about what you're doing and how you're doing it. Second question about the being a former federal employee. There's many gray areas here, but you do have to say yes if you've been a federal employee. And what they're looking for is your personnel form. It's called an SF-50. Now, if you are a stay-in-school participant or you were doing a work-study program, if you say yes and they look for that SF-50 to be attached, sometimes you won't have that. So this is a gray question, if you will. You do have to say yes, but then the follow-up is gonna be attach and upload the documentation that shows that. And sometimes you don't have that. And there's ways to go about doing that and getting that. So third question, I think, is that green card holder.
Yeah. So I'm not sure if this is more of a because it says the person said that most of their job levels requires an active security clearance, which says to me that it's more probably a government contracting.
Corporate. Yes.
Corporate, yeah. So maybe you want to address this. I realize this is a very broad question because, of course, there could be lots of reasons why the person isn't landing right now. But maybe Mike, if you want to address the whole idea of security clearances.
Shira, let me just say one thing real quick.
Oh, sure.
You do need to be a federal employee. I'm sorry, you do need to be a U.S. citizen, except in a very small number of cases. So green card holders would not be able to work for the federal government, but they can work for the corporate sector.
Terrific. Thank you, Corliss.
On the mic.
Terrific. Thank you.
Yeah, I would just say that especially nowadays for a computer engineer, especially, I would really broaden your search geographically. So it's not just the DMV area, but elsewhere, because the DMV area is so focused on government contracting, and a lot of those contracts require U.S. citizens and security clearance and so forth, especially for computer engineering jobs. I would, really broaden the search geographically.
Terrific. Okay, thank you. All right, so this concludes the advanced portion of the meeting. And just from a timing perspective, we are actually right up at 10 o'clock. So some of you who saw this announcement that I posted on LinkedIn and through other job support groups noticed that we were going to 10. Meetup actually doesn't have a 45-minute block. They only have an hour block. So some of you might have seen that this goes to 10:15. So in deference to that, we'll go ahead and stay on until 10:15. Those of you who need to leave at 10, certainly feel free to do so. And by the way, for those who want to follow up with any ones of us afterwards, I will put the email address up there as well. So looking in the chat box here, I think some of the questions
we have questions going back for quite a while. So
okay.
If you don't mind, I'll throw a few at you from the very beginning. Okay.
Please.
So one person mentioned that someone else had talked about that in the job market, adaptability is the #1 soft skill employers look for. What are your thoughts?
I think all three of us can answer that, myself, Mike, and Corliss. I'd say Yes, certainly adaptability, agility, and not only that, I'd say innovative thinking, right? This is a time when we've been using this term forced innovation, where people and organizations have to rethink the way they do what they do. Your ability to not only be personally adaptable and agile and flexible, but also to come up with creative ideas for how to do work differently could be a really interesting way to set yourself apart in an interview when you're talking to an employer and you ask that question. Say, well, how has this organization had to be adaptable and flexible in the COVID time? And they start, and then you start bantering with them and say, oh, have you thought about this? And have you thought about that? And sort of engage them in a conversation. So that's kind of my quick response. Mike, and then Corliss, if you guys want to address that.
So I would say focus on when if there was a new software or new tool that your organization was rolling out and you were the guru or the champion, or you were, adopting it and helping others to adopt it, make sure that's represented on your resume. Show that you were sort of at the forefront of technology or innovation, or bringing the company forward to some next phase. And so those kind of things really express and demonstrate that you're adaptable and you're continuously learning and you're jumping into to new technologies.
Great. Corliss, any thoughts?
Yes, Shira. So in the federal government, a lot of times agencies would like to see several vacancies before they fill one. And you showing that you have a broad range of skills is super important, because you might be hired to do job one, but then there's nobody to do job 2 and 3. And so you have to do components of other types of work as well. So that's why it's really good to have a very, very comprehensive federal resume when you're applying to jobs. And those skills are super important. Absolutely.
Great. Thanks so much.
Okay, so for our next question we have, how can a prospect gauge a company's interest after a phone interview?
Great question. Really challenging. I don't even know if there is a way to. I mean, because look, employers, their job is to be poker face and poker voice, right? Because you are one of many, many candidates that they are screening. You have no idea what happens at the end of that call, how you compare, what they thought. They're going to be nice and professional, but yeah, I don't even know if there is a way. Mike?
I don't think so.
Yeah.
Oh,
so
that's
yeah,
not what
sorry. I know. Wish I had a better answer. You just kind of have to, keep be patient.
All right. This is a question. Very curious. The situation got brought up before. If you desire to change careers from private sector to a federal role, what's the recommendation on resume length? Because you want to fit in, but maybe you haven't been used to, doing that federal role before. So what about resume length?
Yeah, and Corliss, I know you mentioned 5 pages or so, but do you want to address this one a little more deeply?
Yeah, so there's ways to do this. This is what we do all the time, is you take a resume and you build in the skills that you would have had to perform if you were successful at the accomplishment that you achieved. So there's ways to do that. And what we do is we actually take it backwards. So we actually look at what skills the job requires, and then we figure out how we can use transferable skills to show that you meet those requirements. So 5 pages is still what you need to submit. On average, could be 4, could be 6 or 7, but we like to aim for 5. 5 pages is what you still need to submit, even if you're coming from the private sector to the federal sector. If you're a student, a 3 to 4 page resume, same thing. You need to figure out what skills did you utilize and how we can leverage those in your next career move. Like Shira said, the historical work that you performed has to link to your target job. We call it the slinky effect, right? So you have to connect the past, and you have to connect the future, and your resume is that slinky, that story you're telling to the prospective employer.
And if I could just make a general comment here, and Corliss, maybe you'll have a way to sort of compare and contrast what I'm saying. In the private sector, part of the reason why resumes need to be shorter, and by the way, 2 pages, not only normal but expected. You could even go into 3 if you had to these days, because everybody just scrolls down the screen. I would not go past 3, but you could go 2.5 to 3. Is because employers are the results focused, and they don't have a whole lot of time, and they want to see that you can get to the point fast. Are you an efficient thinker? The federal government, Corliss, you can kind of contrast this, but I sort of say with the federal government resumes, they want to know every time you tied your shoelaces because they want to know they have to minimize their risk in a much sort of different way, because when they hire you for the long term, for like forever. That's just my impression. Corliss, could you explain the reason for the length of the federal resume versus the private sector?
Yeah, so it's fairly simple. So they actually have a checklist in federal HR, and it looks like here's the skills that this particular job series requires, and here's the level at which we need to see those skills. And then they look at your resume, and they're comparing to see if you have what they're looking for. And it actually used to be called a crediting plan, and they would give you credit when they saw the skills that they needed to see. It's not about accomplishments, because they actually follow the Code of Federal Regulations that tells them what skills a person needs to possess in order for them to hire that person. It does not say anything about accomplishments. So if you were to go to the CFR and open up the if you will, the HR Bible that they follow, it's not going to say, you know, you can hire Corliss Jackson if she saved IBM $1 billion. It's going to say, you can hire this candidate if they can perform this work at this level. So when you have that outlined in your resume saying, I performed this work at this level and here's how I did it, they can give you credit for that. If you don't give them the specifics of how you perform the work, they don't give you credit and they just bypass you.
Great explanation, Corliss. So you guys see the very big difference between private sector accomplishments, results, and the federal government. Have you done it? Do you have the skills? Great. Thank you. KiKi?
All right, so we have another question that has to do with phone interviews, and I would say this is probably also for interviews that are done virtually as well, and that is the thank you note that you mentioned before, is it applicable after a phone interview? Is it still something that you should send?
I would say yes. I would say it's very rare when people do it. So if you do it, it's going to make you stand out. I mean, it's the most professional thing you can do. Most people don't, but if you do, I think you get bonus points. Mike?
Yeah, I would say if it's a 20-minute phone interview, yes. Well, first of all, yes, you still should send a thank you note. If it's a hour-long in-person interview, of course your thank you note's going to be a bit longer. If it's a 20-minute phone interview, your thank you note I think should be more simple, sort of reflecting how long the interview itself was.
Great, thanks. KiKi?
So a couple of these questions I think have already been answered as we went along in the discussion earlier, but this question is kind of interesting. It has to do with what's the best way to work with HR folks who are not necessarily the hiring managers or the technical experts on the job being considered. So they don't know necessarily whether or not you have the expertise you need to have. What's the best way to work with them and communicate that you should be pushed on to the next level?
That's great. Actually, Mike, I'd love to toss this one to you first. I know you, because you're the recruiter. You were the recruiter, but I think you understand the HR side of things too.
Yeah. So I would say, yeah, most HR recruiter people certainly understand, especially in technical recruiting, that we don't understand the technicalities of the parallel processing of data science and things like that. And so just be respectful as a candidate. Just be respectful of the fact that assume they do know. Assume the HR recruiter person does know a lot of these intricacies or has a pretty technical awareness or knowledge, and just be respectful of, and try to build a relationship with that person. And that's pretty much my only advice as far as that goes.
Okay, yeah, I think I would agree with Mike completely. I'd also just let you know that from the HR person's perspective, they have a checklist. The hiring manager said, please find someone who can do X, Y, Z, PDQ. They might ask you those questions. They may not be able to vet you to the same depth that the hiring manager would, but they still have a series of questions they need to ask to make sure you are worthy of being moved on, number one. Number two, their job also is to check for culture fit. So even on a phone interview, they're listening for that. They're listening for how affable you are. They're listening for how much of a good listener you are and how you communicate. And there's some subtle cues there. So that's part of their job, is the culture fit. And by the way, if you want to ask questions of the HR person in a phone interview, understanding that they're not going to have necessarily the technical expertise of your job. To me, and Meg, you can, share your thoughts. I think it's okay to stump the HR person or stump the recruiter. It's okay. That at least shows that you're thoughtful and that you have a really great question. Even if they say, great question, let's leave that for the hiring manager. Fine, that it's okay that they don't know. But the fact that you asked it, I think, really shows your competency. Mike?
Yeah, and one of the best ways to show your expertise and your intelligence is to be able to communicate something technical, something complex in a simple way that's understandable to someone who's not very technical. So as a recruiter, as a former recruiter, I would be interested to see how someone could describe something that was quite technical to a non-technical person. That was part of the evaluation process.
Great answer, thanks. KiKi?
We have a couple of questions that I think we can combine together when you respond to them. So, in the spirit of tailoring a resume to a job, is it acceptable to leave a job out of the resume if it is not connected to the job being considered? That's part one. And part two, how about employment gaps related to being laid off? How do you suggest addressing that on a resume or interview? So what should you keep in? What should you keep out?
Mm-hmm. So I'll go first. Mike, you can follow up. First of all, employers really, really want to know your chronological history. It's very, very important to them. So accuracy matters. You do not want to leave off job, and I'm going to address how you do it, but you don't want to leave the job off. Now, how you actually address the job, that's a different story. I would mention it, but I would give very little space to it. There's no law that says that on your private sector resume, you have to give equal space to every single job. No law at all. In fact, I believe in something that's called weighting a resume. Weighting, W-E-I-G-H-T. Weighting meaning you give more emphasis to the jobs that you've done that are related to the jobs that you want to go to, and then de-emphasize the ones that are less relevant. You don't have to give a lot of space to it. There's no reason to call attention to it. Put it there, mention it. I'd say the company, the title, the dates, and maybe a very short, little paragraph, like a 2 or 3 lines, just to say, did this, right? But then they're kind of breezing on to the next thing because optically, you want them to focus on, almost like an advertising document, focus on the things that are most relevant. Let me just stop there. Mike, any thoughts on that particular comment?
I agree. No.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Great. And then KiKi, what was the second part of the question?
The second part was, what about being laid off? How do you address that on a resume?
Well, first of all, you don't have to actually put what happened in that role on your resume. Occasionally, I've seen people actually put their reason for leaving, but most people don't. So you just have your end date, and that's it. In the interview, okay, that's a different story. That's usually where you'd have to address the situation, and particularly certainly right now with COVID, everybody understands that is the most understandable, reason for leaving. But to the extent that you can say to the employer when they say, why did you leave? And you can say, look, the organization was going through a restructuring, if this is true. If there was a restructuring, or we had financial situation, or we had a new CEO and they brought in their new people, that kind of thing. That's not really a personal reason, but just organizational. That's always kind of a really good way to address that. Mike?
Yeah, I would just, to the extent you can, try not to have gaps on your resume, but because it really is important to see the chronology and see where you've been, even if it's not that relevant to the job. And I would also, having said everything we've said, try to be creative. Think of ways you can volunteer, ways you can be involved, even if it's 10 to 20 hours a week. You can say, I worked for this nonprofit or this and worked 10 hours a week or something like that. Try to think of things you can put on your resume that are genuine.
It's a really great point, Mike. Thanks for bringing that up. Yeah, anything you can do to overcome that gap, whether it's volunteering, because there's all kinds of ways to volunteer, or certainly if you actually did any contract work, any gig work, any self-employment, any projects that shows that you were actually working, again, volunteer or paid, during that time, really helps to ease the mind of the employer that, oh, they were actually occupied during that period. Again, I'm looking at the time. So maybe KiKi, like maybe one more question, that a big one.
I've got the perfect one.
You got it. Okay.
Everybody wants to know the answer to, I am sure. And this comes from Michael. He says, several of the leaders in CNM, as well as many regular attendees, say that our resume is only 2% of the job search and that LinkedIn is quickly becoming the wave of the future. Do you folks agree or disagree? So this is about the importance of LinkedIn for our job search.
Yes, and we can have a whole deep dive on LinkedIn, which we can't do in the next few minutes. So I will address it. And then
So
Mike,
come back? Is that what you're saying? Come back.
What'd you say? Come back next time and we can do more on that. I would agree with that. I'm not sure about the percentages, right? But here's what I would say. So your LinkedIn profile, well, first of all, if you don't have a LinkedIn profile, professionally speaking, you don't exist. Put a period at the end of that statement. You don't exist if you don't have a LinkedIn profile. But it's more than just having one. You need to have one that is robust, that is compelling, that says where you're going in your headline, the about section that has a really compelling narrative about who you are and what you do and the problems that you solve. And the experience section on your LinkedIn is your resume. People don't realize that it is your resume. You can cut and paste from your regular resume into LinkedIn. And yes, some of you might have the question right now, but wait, Shira, you told me that I need to customize my resume for every single job, but I can't keep customizing my LinkedIn. That's true. It's a little tricky, but what you can do is in your LinkedIn experience section, cut and paste the most consistent parts of your resume, the ones that really aren't going to change. There are probably certain kinds of accomplishments you're always going to be putting on your resume. Those to me are the ones that go into LinkedIn. But to the person's question, yeah, LinkedIn is where a lot of recruiters go first. The last statistic I heard was that 67% of all recruiters use LinkedIn exclusively for their searching. 97% use LinkedIn to some extent. A lot of people are not going on job boards anymore. A lot of recruiters are proactively finding people rather than putting out a job notice on Indeed or what have you, saying, hey, candidates, come to me. Recruiters are proactively going to them and using LinkedIn for their searching. Therefore, the experience section is where they would go. And then, yes, they may very well say to you after they have identified you, either through LinkedIn or through a personal referral, by the way, do you happen to have a resume? Okay, now you have the resume to follow up and to bolster your LinkedIn profile. But yes, LinkedIn is unbelievably important. Mike, any thoughts?
Yeah, so I would say when it comes to a job that we have posted as a hiring organization, I would definitely look to see who's applied. But when it comes to actual interviews, I would look at the LinkedIn profile to really just get a little more information about the candidate, see that they have a professional page, see that it reflects what I'm seeing on the resume. So I may not, if there's 100 applicants for a job, many of those may not be as qualified. When it comes time to invite people for interviews, I will be looking at the LinkedIn profiles to make sure everything looks up to snuff.
That's great.
Hey, Shira?
Yeah, I was going to say this. What about the government side of things?
Yeah, so we don't look a lot at LinkedIn, but if somebody is interested in hiring a person, they will look at their social media in depth. So we don't use it as a screen out at all until we get to the hiring process. And we will look at it. Doesn't really matter if it's super aligned with the job that you're applying to. What matters is that you don't have anything egregious on there or anything that shouldn't be on any of your social media.
Great, thank you. So with that, I know we have more questions, but we've just run out of time. So I wanted to sort of wrap up here and give you our contact information again. Feel free to take a screenshot of this. You're welcome to email us with questions. We are all open networkers, so you're all welcome to link in with us. Send us a LinkedIn connection. I would recommend that you, in the invitation to LinkedIn, when you're doing a connection, just mention Hire Moment Mastermind, and then we'll know where we saw you. I also want to encourage you, those of you who are looking for other free job support groups. These are some ones in the DC area, although because of COVID, they're all offering online opportunities as well. Feel free to take a screenshot of this. And I do want to thank all of these organizations for helping to promote Hire Moment Mastermind. And yes, ma'am.
Can you just tell us where to get the recording, please?
Yes, absolutely. I will go back to the beginning here. The recording will be here on this third bullet, purposefulhire.com /Hire Moment Mastermind, and there's dashes, and Hire is HIRE. Okay, so I will helpfully have that recording up within the next number of hours, but you can always find the recording there. And to wrap everything up, I just want to leave everyone with an inspirational thought: to trust in the Lord with all of your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge Him, and He will make your path straight. As you're doing your job search, please be encouraged that the Lord is with you and He wants the best for you, and trust in Him in all your searching.
Amen to that.
Yes. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We look forward to speaking with you next week, and feel free, of course, to forward this information to your colleagues who might benefit from the work that we're doing here at Hire Moment Mastermind. Thanks, everyone. Have a blessed day.
Thank you, Shira.
You're welcome.
Thank you.